Hey, this is Rob Anspach, and welcome back to another edition of E-Heroes for those keeping count. This is episode 311. So we're getting up there. And, my next guest, he is the son of a legend. And I know a lot of you guys are, another legend. But you know what? When it comes to legacy, and I talk about legacy a lot, you know, uh, my next guest, Bond Halbert, the son of Gary Halbert, has been taking his father's legacy and pushing it forward. And I tell you what, he's doing a lot of great things to a lot of copywriters out there and teaching it the right way. So I want to thank Bond for being here. And it's I've known your dad for a long time, and he passed, I guess, 17 years ago. But the legacy that he left behind, especially in the boron letters, um, is still, you know, making copywriters go, wow. They just can't beat that, that I guess that storytelling, the way he did
Mm.
it.
No, I'll say he's not just doing copywriters. There's a new breed of people out there that, they're telling and reframing Gary Halbert lessons. And so, I mean, he's, even people who aren't, sometimes they're not crediting him, but there's a process that happens in the copywriting and marketing world where you read something and then you hear something, you're like, oh, that's brilliant, and everything else. And then about 5 years into it, you're like, oh, that's where they got it from.
Mm.
And then you say, oh, that's where they got it from. And that happens. Sometimes we've even found stuff. It's like, oh, that's where Dad got that from.
Yeah, and I always found it fascinating that he would start all his letters off, you know, like 3 miles south of Jewfish Creek or
Mhm.
someplace, and I'm like, where the heck is that? But
Do you
it's
want to know
such
where
a
it is?
name.
Do you want to know where it is?
It's in Florida, I guess, somewhere, right?
Well, actually, okay. So my dad started off. He wanted the letters. He liked it because, like in the movies and the official, like like if, uh, stuff, it would always say the time and the date and where they were.
Mhm.
And so my dad thought that that would set off. It had a certain prestige, and so he would do from Los Angeles or from Beverly Hills, California. Well, Jewfish Creek is actually the little area that separates the Keys from mainland Florida.
Mhm.
And so he said when he crossed that bridge, it was like relaxation time. So he always considered it that. So sometimes he'd actually have his houseboat docked over at Jewfish Creek Marina and everything. And it was, there was you went down further in the Keys, and there was Marathon where we had lived for a while, Key West where we had lived for a while. And then he'd go back and forth between living in Miami and stuff. And so a lot of people wondered where that was and if it was an actual real place. It is. It's a little creek. I think there's even a sign there on Highway A1A. And when that's the official marker crossing saying that you're in the Keys. So then he started doing that. And then the funny thing happened was he always liked to say where he was from. That he liked it so much that he stopped saying from Miami. He would say miles west or whatever it was. So he bought a GPS that he couldn't figure out how to operate. And so, but to tell him what direction, where he was from Jewfish Creek. And so since he couldn't do that, what he did was he sent me one so that I would learn to operate it. And on the phone, I would walk him through finding out where, to mark the spot so that he could say where he was from there. And that's why when you see 2,000 miles 40 miles north of or whatever, that's how he figured it out. But he was always looking for very simplistic solutions for complex problems, and if he could, he would get somebody else to do it. And I was often like, okay, hey, Juan will figure this out for me, and he'll do it. So he had me send it out. And the funny thing was, is GPS, because it was so inexpensive, it didn't have a thing where you could put in a waypoint. So
Mm.
what you had to do was you marked the waypoint you were at and then edited the actual coordinates. I had to figure that out on my own. The instruction manual did not explain it, because if they had explained that, it would have taken away all the sales for their $300 model. Anyway, but it's a side note. But that's where it comes from.
But he had a simplicity to his writing, and it sucked you in, and it
Yeah.
and it made you want to, not only be his friend, but feel sympathy for him or feel some type of emotion. And, or at the end, he'll say, you can buy this or not. You can, and it would just, you just felt compelled to, be in Gary's world.
Yeah.
And to me, that type of copywriting is a lot better than some of the stuff that they're teaching today. It's now they're teaching, you know, force it. And I'm like, I'm trying to read this. I'm like, I just feel like it oozes desperation, and it just so I guess Gary tuned me into how I should feel,
Well, he
like,
did it naturally, but
yeah.
he did explain to me in a lesson one time that what people are there's a certain form of addiction people have to randomness, and that's what gambling is. You get a random reward, and that's a dopamine rush. And the reason the Gary Halbert letter was so popular is people didn't know what they were going to get when they opened up that mail. Well, you get some people's mail, you're going to get this this political gripe, or you're going to know
Mhm,
that you're going to get this. And I'm not throwing shade at anybody, or you're going to get this talk about the success story of somebody's student or something like that. You knew what you were going to get. My dad's, you didn't know if he was going to tell you a tale about almost getting arrested, or his boat flipping over, or you didn't know if you were going to get a story that was like going to have this really incredible copywriting lesson in it. You had no idea.
mhm,
And that addiction to the randomness of it is, that's that really got people to read it. So people get stuff, and they're like, okay, this is my fishing magazine, so I'm going to sit down and I'm going to put it on the coffee table, and when I get to feel the right thing. People actually had, and this kind of freaked my dad out a little bit, but he did enjoy it. They had what they called, several people called the Gary Halbert Hour. So
mhm,
what they would do is they'd get that letter, they'd shut themselves in their office or wherever it was, they'd open up a beer, get a glass of wine, soda, whatever, and they would sit down undisturbed, reading this, like, the tiniest of novellas, because the newsletter back in the print days was always 8 to 12 pages because of the way it was printed. So he
mhm.
had a choice between, writing it for 8 or 12 pages. And that made people, so when you got that letter, you had no idea what it was going to be this month.
Well, let's talk about that because the thing
Mm.
is that you took these letters that your dad wrote to you, and I'll let you explain, you know, how that happened. But, I don't know what age you were when you were getting these letters, but at some point in your life, you said, you know what, I got to put these letters into a book. I got to share these out to the world.
Well, I wish I could take credit for that as much as, okay. So what? Let me share how this happened. I was 15 and I turned 16 in the first couple letters.
Mhm,
Okay, he marks my birthday. He's you can see him saying happy birthday. And what happened was my dad was teaching me marketing and copywriting, mostly direct response marketing. Now, if you studied my father and his people, we did he didn't turn around and sit there and go over your copy and say, look, you use the word miracle and you should use the word amazing. It
mhm,
wasn't that kind of stuff. What he did was he taught you how to think differently. Okay, and so he taught me how to think differently. And I'll give you a quick example of that. My daughter was at school. She was talking with two other girls, and the first one says, "Oh, my dad says that I'm too irresponsible. He's not going to give me a car." And the other one said, "My dad says I can have a car, but I got to pay for it myself." My daughter said, and she was like 15 at the time. She's like, "My dad already bought me a car." And he says, because, if you look at the statistics, the chances of your children dying from drugs or gang violence are very small. And the number one biggest danger is being driven around by a teenage boy who's showing off. And so he said that I'm going to have to, I have to learn to drive and, drive for myself. And that, whenever I've told that to any father, they're like, oh my God, that's so true. You know what I'm saying? It reframed the way that people think about things.
mhm.
And so my dad taught me as a marketer the way that you reframe stuff. So rolling back to the very first beginning, so I've been around direct marketing my whole life. Okay. My dad he got fired from the last job he ever had on the day I was born, or the day before I was born. had an argument with his boss about wearing orange socks. Anyway, and he decided to start doing everything differently, and that's why all of his children had like normal, regular, average names. But then he names me Bond, right? Um, so he has this like epiphany that he's going to do a lot of stuff differently. But what happened was, as my dad is notorious for mismanaging his money.
Mm.
He just was terrible at it. And I always said, my dad's ability to make money was only eclipsed by his ability to blow it. And as a result, one time I was with him, and I remember exactly where I was. I was in Santa Monica, and we were walking over to his favorite coffee shop. It was, it's either Zucky's or Zuki's. I don't know how it's specifically pronounced. The sign's still there, but it's closed now. Anyway, and I said, I'm really lucky. And he says, why is that? And I said, well, my oldest brother, got to get all the hand-me-down cars and all the toys and stuff like that. And I said, but I get to see how you make the money, and I'm going to pay attention to that. He thought that was like the sharpest thing any like 11, whatever I was, little kid had ever said. And so he immediately started taking me to meetings with big name marketers and showing me the ropes in the business. So my first job was at a list broker. He one time took me out of school and he said, whatever they're going to teach you in school today, like your math, your history, you can learn tomorrow. He says, I'm going to show you where the magic happens with business. And he took me to a meeting at a restaurant, mid morning, so it was empty. And it was with Eric Weinstein, a top list broker, and Jay Abraham and my dad. And so my, Eric's job was to identify what are the hot lists that the company had in the list brokerage company. And then Jay's job was, what's the offer that we think that we can make them a financial report, or not financial, a report or some sort of information product. Mm-hmm. And my dad would come up with the hook for it, and he'd write the headlines for it. And so this is the beginning of my education. And he flew me like,
and it's ironic because the generation coming up now has no idea what copywriting is. They have no idea what mail is. I mean, we hardly get any mail now, and everything that they do is in the digital world.
And it works now, though. Mail has come back around to working well.
Yeah.
And the best thing about mail right now that people don't understand is you have very little competition. There's no competition in that mailbox. And they look forward to it. And, it's and the other thing is, if you do something really successful online, this is why you don't see new swipe files, right? Because I'm not going to share with you some great piece that I just wrote, because somebody's going to copy, click, and paste it, and they're going to just, start running ads, and they're going to dilute the power of that. Mm-hmm. Mail, nobody's willing to spend the money. You can't copy, click, and just paste because you still have to pay for postage. You still have to get the list. You still have to do all those other things. Mm-hmm. So mail has a huge advantage and still works again. But anyway, so what I wanted to say was, he was actually teaching me direct response marketing and copywriting, and that all got interrupted when he went to Boron. Mm-hmm. And so I was there with him on the work up to Boron and, all of this other stuff. And there's a good explanation that he does. He actually was not guilty of the crime that he had committed. But I remember this lesson was really stuck out with me more than anybody else got, who he told it to, which was, he was in there and he said, you know what, I didn't do this. He says, but I've done other things. And I'm going to consider this cleaning my karmic slate, period. And, so and I'm going to come out of here and I'm going to use it the time to get lean, get mean, come out kicking and screaming and running. And that's what he did. And so what he wanted to do with the Boron letters is he's wanted to use them as templates for what would become the Gary Halbert letter. Mm-hmm. Eventually, he asked me if he could share the actual letters, because they were mine and they were personal, mm-hmm. right? And I said, yes, you can. And so he started publishing them. And then what I did was I started doing updates on them in the written version, in the Amazon version, that, to explain what's going on behind the scenes and what he was thinking and other things, and a modern twist, because people couldn't figure out modern twists on like 976 numbers don't really exist or do a thing. And I was like, but you can apply that to text codes. Mm-hmm. It's the same thing. You trust the phone company that, if you've got a text code where you text this number and that's just to send $10 to get a small micro bit of information. It's the same thing as a 976, get your daily horoscope. So I would update these concepts for the modern world in the, in the commentary and stuff like that and put it out. And so, I mean, but the boron letters, it had such a profound impact on so many people, because so many people were like, um, they imagined that they were me, and their father was the one writing them these lessons, and stuff like that. And so it gave me a kind of like a brotherhood with a lot of people who read that and loved it. So it kicked off. The very first letter was written on my dad's birthday. It says June 12th, right? And I was born 30 years and 2 weeks after he was.
I was
So two
born.
weeks later, that's my birthday.
My birthday is June 18th.
Uh,
So
well, I did a post. I said all the best copywriters and marketers are born in June.
yeah, and the thing is, the first time I started reading this, and I was like, wow, it just feels, yeah, I could feel the push that he wanted me to do something, but I also felt that it was it spoke directly to me, even though it was written to you or to somebody else, and it was like, wow, you know what? This is how I want to write.
Yeah.
And your dad was kind of the catalyst, for me to write the books that I write, the way I write. I put my personality into them, and people say, "You can't write like that." I have to do whatever I want. And Gary did it. I can do this. It's
Yeah.
like, and so I get these first book out, and people are like, "Wow, that's great stuff." And in the last 11 years, we've produced 45 books, and I've been telling my clients, stop writing like you just came out of college and write from the heart, write, you know, with your personality. And so some of these lawyers have to rethink how they write, because there's just they've gone to this Vulcan school of no emotion, and it's like I'm trying to get them to be emotional.
If somebody came to learn copy from my father or me, the last thing we want to hear is that they have a creative writing degree from college. It is the last thing we want to hear. Well, actually, the last thing I want to hear is that they got a business degree and they learned how to write a prospectus. That's the one that's the last for me. And I have a degree from college. I'm not knocking that. I'm saying that you have to undo all of that, all of the damage that college does.
Yeah.
So, my daughter came in one time and asked me, says, so I got to write this. How do I write? And I said, well, it depends on your professor. I said, most school, what they want you to do is the exact opposite of what's good writing. So in school, they want you to write long paragraphs. They want you to write, make things more complicated. Than they take a small subject and make it really long. They want you to use higher grade level language. They want to do the exact opposite of everything that we teach you in copywriting not to do. And they want you to write, very much third person as opposed to first person, and that, do all of these other stuffs. And so, and I said, well, here, let me show you something. And her, I remember her professor was a doctor. So that means that he had to have published something. To get your doctoral thesis and anything, you have to publish something. And so I looked up and found the thing that he had written, right? And I'm like, you see that? He's got 0 reviews and 0 buys, right? I mean, his bestseller rank on Amazon is nothing, right? It's like 0. I'm like, look here, and I'm like, that's the difference between whether or not, I mean, how you do things.
Mhm.
And so, yeah, you have to undo that. You have to undo that damage.
But
So,
you know, and I think for this generation, it's hard for them to fathom that your dad made millions prior to the internet. There
mhm.
was no Amazon. We didn't have cell phones, and here he's creating these letters, mailing them out to people. We're having a service mail them out, and people are like, well, how? It's and so when I first started my first business years ago, 30 years ago, I didn't have any of that either. You know? And I think
Well,
sometimes I think sometimes, yes, this stuff makes it easier, but it makes us lazier.
it does. Okay, so let me tell you about because look, I grew up in both worlds, right? Okay, so 10, let's just say 10 years was when I really started paying attention to the business, even though I was part of, like I said, mailing, stamping, licking and stamping. And I didn't lick them. We used a sponge and stuff like that. I mean, literally, I know the fastest way to get 1,000 pieces of mail out from your living room.
Mm-hmm.
But so I started paying attention at 10. So that would have been 1978, right? So that's where my venture started. And then,
Yeah, we're about the same
believe
age
it,
then.
believe it or not, my brother and I had to convince my dad that the World Wide Web was going to change things. He didn't see it. But here's the important part. Okay, the important part is when you learn the core principles of what my dad taught and what he taught me and how he taught me to think and everything. It didn't make a difference when they applied it. So as soon as he accepted what the web was going to be, the
Mm-hmm.
GaryHalbertLetter.com became the online mecca of all for all copywriters.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, he knew that, because he could see it. But what happened was it's just a change in venue. But the concepts of writing personally, the concepts. I'll give you a quick thing that demonstrates the understanding of the core principle. You, being a student of my father, you know about his A-pile, B-pile speech, correct?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So for those who don't know, it's really, I'll make a very abbreviated version of it. My dad, one time, he was having lackluster um, results, and all the handbooks told him about direct mail because he knew he wanted to get into direct mail because he discovered that this was salesmanship. And instead, he started knocking on. He used to be a door-to-door salesman. He said, "I can only knock on so many doors at a time." But
Mm-hmm.
a letter, I can mail out to 3,000 people at one time, right? So I want to get into direct mail. And so he read the Thomas Hall guides and like, this is it. I want to go into this. And so, but all these people told him, they said, send all your stuff in a window envelope because it saves you money on addressing the envelope. And if it saves you money on addressing the envelope, you need one fewer sale for the mailing to be profitable. Seemed to make sense. And he said that they also told him to send it using meters, so you're not paying to put on stamps, and send it bulk rate because it's cheaper, and all of these things that lowered the cost. And
Mm-hmm.
then put on some good teaser copy, teasers, the outside envelope stuff. And it wasn't working. And then my dad invented what everybody now refers to as gun to the head advertising. He sat down and imagined, and he said, and by the way, I know that he meant that gun was to my brother's head because my dad spoke an ultimatum. So when he called me, he wouldn't say, "Bond, imagine a guy's got a gun to your head." He would say, "Imagine someone's got a gun to Preston's head," because he knew that was more important than a gun to my head. So
Mm-hmm.
he always thought that way, but he wasn't going to, put that out in his speech. But he would imagine somebody had a gun to his head. And he said, "I'm going to pull the trigger if you don't make a sale. What would you do differently?" And he said he imagined how people would sort their mail. And he says, so they come home from a long day of work and they would sift through the mail, and there was three piles. There was the A pile that was letters from people you love, bills, things that you had to open. B was something with a teaser copy that said, maybe you're gonna, got to need an oil change coming up soon. Here's a coupon, might be of interest, so I'm going to save this in case I want to read it later. The third pile was the trash can, right? Then after a few weeks, the B pile piled up so much that he would throw it in, you'd throw it into the trash can. So the A pile became, I want to get it into the A pile. So how did I do this? And so he created, and I'm not going to go through the rest of it. He created the techniques and explained how we'd make an A pile mailing. And if you see just a regular no return address envelope to you at your house from some realtor, that's an A pile mailing that was learned and pioneered by Gary Halbert. So everybody, when the online world came on, they said, "Oh, we got to think about this, and we'll use Gary Halbert principles and say we need good teaser copy because that's the subject line."
Mm-hmm.
And I said, "No, the very first point and lesson of the subject line is how people sort their email. It's how they sort their mail." I'm like, "How do people sort their emails?" And I said, "They're sorting their emails with different email addresses.
Mm-hmm.
They've got work email addresses, spam email addresses, primary email addresses, personal email addresses." And now I did this back in, I don't know. I mean, I remember the first time I had shared the concept was at John Carlton's Action Seminar decades ago.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, so what I said was, look, and back in the day, you had these two email addresses and you check the spam filter to make sure nothing filtered through the cracks and got into the spam filter that was important of your primary email address. But when somebody turned around and said, "Look, I've got this great, book writing, offer for you and everything, and I'll share it with you. Give me your email address." right? I'll give you these copywriting lessons through this email address. You gave them your spam email address because you've learned from experience that you didn't want to be on somebody's list and not know what you're getting.
Right.
So you would go to your spam email address and you would go right to the top. You'd find what he sent, and you'd look at what he or she did, and you'd say, "This is great stuff," and consume it, and then go back to doing whatever. Or you like, "This is garbage," and go back to the internet looking for the solution you wanted. Either way, excuse me, on the way, you deleted or ignored all the 500 emails that piled up in your spam email address that you never looked at.
Mm-hmm.
So the lesson I had come up with is I said, it would be better for you to be in the spam box of a primary email address than to be in the primary box of a spam email address. So worry about getting a primary email address first. And then I said, here's ways to get that primary email address so that you're showing up on their email address that's on their phone, that you're showing up on their email address that they're checking, throughout the day, not the one that they've got just in case, or they look at once every month and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. So when you see all these people talking about enter a primary email address or something like that, it all goes back to that concept that I actually just, kind of pioneered, but my concept was pioneered from my father's, right? It was from my father's, the key concept, because I had heard that speech so many times that everybody skipped over. They went to spam box and getting delivered, that had to be first class, so it got delivered. They skipped over the very first part. How do people sort? Yeah. Right. And so then I was like, that's how you do it. And so there were all these, tricks that I had learned or developed, and things that you say to get people to enter primary email addresses. So you say things like, look, we throw these flash sales that, people get mad at us when they miss them. So make sure you enter a primary email address you check often so you don't miss it. Have them sign up using a Facebook link, because if you do and everybody puts their primary email address in Facebook, they want to know if somebody's going to talk about them right away. Yeah. These are the things that you do to get primary email addresses, and it's going to, anyway, the whole point is it built upon that. And so when you get things at a very core level, you become better at it. And I realized there was a guy recently that I read an article. He didn't do this recently. He was a professor, and he believed that if you taught children something really well at an early age, they could become masters at something. So he taught his 3 daughters chess. And all 3 went on to be master chess players, and one is the top female chess player in the world, right? And I realized what my dad did for me is I wasn't born somebody who was like, oh, this is, you just got this in my blood. There wasn't a Halbert. There are other Halberts who don't have it. So there's not a Halbert genetic gene that says that you can understand these concepts. He got me thinking that way from the age of 10 on. Mm-hmm. And so, it's like, things that, as my dad would always say, you do anything great, Bond, I get credit for it because I taught you how to think. But if you screw anything up, that's your mom. But anyway, so I just wanted to say that because the thing is, the core principles behind direct mail, the core principles behind what happened back then, if the Halbert students, the people who were Halbert proteges, it doesn't matter what app you're going to come out with. I don't care if it's TikTok, if it was Vine that came and left, if it's Instagram. I don't care if there's a new, the new programs that we can't imagine. The same concepts that he taught are going to still apply. Mm-hmm. Walk in shoes, realize what grabs people's attention. And so one of the things I teach people is like, what works in real life? What got you your biggest laugh in life? Like, I was on a call with a friend of mine, and I was explaining, I said, nobody at my age, I couldn't tell people at 30 that I had 20 years of marketing experience. It just sounded like nonsense, right? And I said, if it wasn't for the boron letters, I wouldn't have any proof of that. And I said, thank God my dad went to prison. And he started busting up laughing. So I was like, that needs to be a subject line. So I actually wrote an email. Thank God my dad went to prison. And everybody had to open that email to find out why I would say something like that, right? So the point is, if you're hearing something that sounds like the same old clickbait that you're seeing over and over, it's just like you get nose blind to something, you're going to get blind to that clickbait. When something makes you sit up and pay attention and grab attention, you're not unique. It's going to work to do that. So I don't care whether we're talking about smartphone technologies, because everybody's now on, consuming more on their phones than their laptops. Very few people, I think few people even have desktops anymore. I think the people with desktops are people who just, they're writers and they love a big screen, and they're people who sit at their machines for, many hours at a time, at a sitting.
And
Not,
I have a desktop and I have a tablet. I got rid of
yeah.
my laptop. I gave it to I gave one to my son, one to my daughter. I just I couldn't take it anymore. I get on an airplane and the thing is just I'm like, screw this tablet. But that's me. I mean, I either like the desktop um, or the tablet to take with me. But you know, I think we're getting into an age though where consumption of data is driving us nuts. I don't think people know where to actually turn to get the right data. And that's why I think mail is making a resurgence. And
Yeah.
I truly believe that the ROI on mail is still higher than digital marketing.
Well, uh, when it comes to digital, so okay, one of the things that I did was when I published my first solo book. Actually, I still have to publish the sequels to that. But when I did it, I wanted to get snail mail addresses so that I could mail to people.
Right.
And so what I did was I offered a bonus, but it was a bonus that had to be physically mailed to them,
Mm.
because that way I would grab snail mail addresses. And snail mail addresses, one, it's very hard to unsubscribe from them. You can just write back and say, take me off your list. But people would just rather throw it in the trash can, right? If they don't want to do that. But it is something where you get undivided attention, and you're less likely to, online is a game of follow the leader, and everybody just, they see one person doing something, it starts to do it, and they copy it. And that's why, I think that, by the time that, here's another concept I'll break and give to you. I believe there are tinkerers, and they're people like me and my dad. They play with things and they try stuff that's brand new that other people haven't messed with. And then there's early adopters. They see what the tinkerers are doing and they say, well, he says that works, I'm going to try it. And then, they work on it. And then there's the mass marketers. These are the people who, I'm building an audience. That's the main thing I'm doing. And I need content. So I'm going to follow the early adopters, maybe a few tinkerers, and share some of the things that early adopters are saying working. And then there's what I call the master managers. And those are the people who take all the information that there is on a subject of, dating, like Evan Pagan, or ClickFunnels stuff and things like that, and we're going to put it all into this one encompassing book that covers it all. But by the time that if I go to traffic and conversion summit, when I'm there, if they're on the stage talking about something, it's something we've either been doing or we've heard about for 2 years. And
Hmm.
by the time you're at that thing, you're competing with a lot of people who have already doing that stuff. You
Right.
know what I'm saying? Now, I was talking about this earlier with a friend of mine. The master manager makes more money than the tinkerer does, but it takes a different personality. We talked about this earlier about the manager versus the creative people. The manager is the person who doesn't mind getting up and once a week having a meeting with their accountant, having a meeting with their, the design team, who's, checking with the managers to make sure that, the media buys are all going and everything. That's not my that part of my brain is missing. My part of my brain that's working is walking on the beach and seeing how to apply one industry kind of innovation to a different industry, or apply it to solve a problem in something else. So all of the Halbert proteges, they all learned they all learned everything the same, reframing and thinking, but they had specific expertise. Like, like Caleb was a better salesman than I am. Um, uh, Sam is great at studying offers and positioning. Right. These are all things we all learned from my dad. It's just that my dad, while teaching them, was really highly focused in this one area, and then he would go and focus in another area and come back and focus in another one. Mine was always the big idea.
Mm.
Okay. So that's why I would do things that were different and new. So it's not like I said, I've got all kinds of problems. I'm not good at managing. I'll never be as wealthy as, these guys who run, companies with big buildings and lots of employees. I literally cannot handle the stress of being responsible for putting food on other families' tables and stuff like that. But it comes with an ability to do things. So I'm the first one to come up with a breakthrough way of how to a system for creating stories that sell.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody comes to the world of copywriting, and one of they take all they all go through the same arc, but the first thing they're taught is headlines. Then they're taught bullets, right? If they're lucky, they're taught closing arguments. But the one thing they're told about stories is, you get a, come up with a good story. And they always say, where do you come up with a good story? And then we always say, you don't come up with one, you find one. It's in the research, you find a good story. So John Carlton's one-legged golfer came from a story about a one-legged golfer, right? Um, and but I was actually in an office of a friend of mine who was a screenwriter, and I looked over and I'm waiting because we're there for game night, and I see this thing, and I was like, wait a minute, what is that? And he says, that's a story arc, right? That they use for, stories. And the line is actually a stress line. This is the high point of the stress. But the beginning is like you're cruising along through life, and then something just happens that's going to change your life and your viewpoint forever. And then you go through the stress of trying to deal with your problems and what you want or your desires or whatever. You're trying things and you're failing and everything, and then you're about to give up, and then everything, all of a sudden the epiphany happens and you come out at the other end of it and you're off on it, and the very end of it is how much better life is. Well, I came up with a system out of figuring out of exactly how to get that out of the five main stories that sell.
Mm-hmm.
And there are five main stories that sell in your copy. There's the story of how the if you have no other story, you can go with the story of the industry. Like, they did that with the Schlitz, not Schlitz. When you're telling people what's the industry of copywriting, you're telling them the history, where it started and all this, and you build trust that way.
Mm-hmm.
There's the story of how the product is made. They did that with Schlitz. They said, we go through all this process and everything else, and it was actually Claude Hopkins who talked about it, but they kind of covered that in a similar way in Mad Men, and they explained, look, yeah, but the people at Schlitz were like, yeah, we do this triple filtering for the water, and we do this, and they're like, you need to tell everybody that. He goes, but all the beer does that, and they said, but nobody's telling them that.
Right.
So there's the story of how the product is made. There's the story of the company and its existence, how it came to be. And then there's the story of the owner or and their epiphany and what made them get into it and how they're changing lives and stuff like that. And then finally, there's the story of the average customer's experience, and mimicking that so that they go, yeah, that's me. And so I came up with this system using the ARC to actually do the research and have that story create, and it's actually done on your own. So what I did was I created key questions that you could ask based on those points on the arc. And then you do those key questions on the points on the arc, and you ask them out of order to a group of actual clients, of actual customers and everything. And they give you the answers in their own words, and you stitch them together. And now you actually have a story that makes them go, yeah, yeah, yeah. And then you take, based on their market level of awareness, that's where you start the story. So if you're talking about, if their market level awareness is, struggling to, figure out which is the best copywriting mentorship or group program to enter, you're going to start the story a little bit further up the arc. Mm-hmm. Okay. So, then the beginning, you don't have to start with, I just discovered I wanted to be a copywriter, by here and there. That's where you start market level awareness one. Market level awareness one are people who don't know they want to be copywriters, and you have to call them out and say, have you always had an interest in writing? Would you like to work on a laptop from anywhere in the world and be your own boss? Then that's where you start market level awareness one, right?
And
so
that's
you are
that was the concept that prompted me to go from struggling owner operator of a carpet cleaning business to go to Joe Polish's seminar and to meet all these people in 1998, and basically the same headline, and so I dove into copywriting. I learned how to do it, and 2 years later, I'm presenting ads to Joe to give out to all these carpet cleaners to make money, and it was like, wow, I had to learn how to reframe being this local carpet cleaner, owner of a carpet cleaning business, to now, transitioning to, teaching marketing. And so I started this agency in 2001, and It was I wanted to be able to take a laptop and work anywhere in the world, and I have. Although now I sit at my desktop because I don't want to go anywhere.
Well, it's actually the one thing I'll bust the bubble on a lot of people for, like if you were going to be a freelance copywriter, there are people they want to go and travel around. The problem is you're taking a phone call at 3 a.m. in the morning, in Italy, right? So it's not as freeing as you want. If you want to do that, you have to create a system where your clients understand they're not going to get a response from their email till the next day, and or what you're doing is you're running your own stuff, right, and like writing books and doing your own stuff, which is what I do. So I literally am the guy who can write on a plane. It doesn't make a difference whether I'm connected, and doesn't make a difference on the timing for other people. But
Right.
that is an anomaly. It's not the regular thing. The thing is, the one thing about marketing, and this too, is when you launch a campaign, you're now on fire watch. I mean, you're sitting there. Okay, wait a minute, hold on. We just had a problem with one of our things, and I was like, I called my brother. I said, this page, like the sales aren't coming in as fast as they should. I said, the page isn't loading quickly. He called up and found out that we had only 5% left on our disk space for the hosting, because he had 95% clogged with some back stuff. I'm like, you're always constantly on Firewatch, for this thing that's happening. And you run Facebook advertising, somebody's got to be sitting there watching, not you, hopefully, but somebody's got to be sitting there watching and turning those negative comments into opportunities to bond with the people who are positive, or getting rid of them. And it's just that the laptop lifestyle isn't exactly quite what other people sell it to be. It's not quite that easy.
But, for me, it was that thing that enabled me, that I guess that vision to transfer out of one industry into another, and, I found my purpose, and,
That's Listen, that's the best thing in life. The thing is, I never wanted to take my dad's shoes or anything like that, and I never did. I never tried. I do not give my father's speeches unless I'm explaining a concept like that. A pile, B pile is only because I'm going to show you how to take it to the next level, right?
right.
I've never done that. But thanks to my dad, I learned very early in life how, look, if you don't have any money, it'll make you miserable. If you're worried about food and your kids and stuff like that, that's always going to be a problem. And so my dad taught me very early on to have FU money, right? So that you don't have to take any job you don't want to do. And so my dad actually made more money working with me than he made in any other endeavor he ever did. He took in more money with a project that him and I worked on together, and I wasn't like, I was actually the guy behind the whole concept.
Mhm.
Um, and but the first thing I did was, remember how I told you my dad, was terrible, but he blew money all the time. Well, I saw him, we'd go from, my dad driving like brand new Cadillacs to all of a sudden he's scrounging through the couch looking for change to put gas in the car to go to a meeting, right? And I had this up and down rocky thing. And I'm like, I'm not doing that with my children and everything else. So when we made quite a bit of money, I'm like, okay, I'm going to go buy a house. I'm going to put such a big down payment down that I can work at McDonald's and always pay it off.
Mhm.
And I'm going to do this and that. But what that taught me though, is after you have what you need, that the money wasn't buying you happiness, and
Right.
you don't, now, trust me, I don't expect anybody to get that. The only way you get that is when you've had a lot of money and been more miserable and then had less money and were happier than that time you remember having more money and being miserable. Okay. So that's the only time you get that lesson. And so, you have to have the money first. You have to then lose some of the money, be happier. And then the best of all is to be happy and have money, right? That's obviously true. But the number one goal in for me has always been, I teach my kids and everything, is, and there's no right or wrong to this. It's he who spends the most time on earth happy wins. And
Mhm.
that means that if you are, everybody lives for 1/3 of their life. Like, I was in school, I loved it. I was the quarterback of the football team. We went to state championship, and they spend the last 2/3 of their life just remembering how great it was back then, right? Bummer. Okay, then there's the childhood sucks and everything, but I was making good money and I was a yuppie. I was driving a nice car and all this in the middle third. But and then now I'm just getting old and things hurt and I have to get up and go to the bathroom 5 times a night and whatever. And their happiness was that middle third. And then they're the worst ones for me are the ones who work their first 2/3 of their life hoping that they'll get that house on the golf course. And then after 30 days of playing the same golf course over and over, they're like, oh, really? This wasn't as great as I thought. Or they have a health problem, right? Which we all get as we get older. And so my whole point is the time I've always very early on said, I need to be happy now, but I need to prepare so that the future's not miserable.
Mhm.
So, I read it somewhere and I think it's true. I teach my child, especially my son, if what you're doing is not making you happy right now or working on your future, it's a waste of time.
Mhm.
And so, there are things and it's different it's different strokes for different folks. I mean, it's like, I don't, I mean, having children and preparing them for life it feels so great in a way that people who don't, people like you and I have a feeling that people who never had kids are not going to have,
Right.
and it's a great thing. And there's nothing, I'm not dissing people who don't choose that route.
No, but
Right.
for me, it was okay. Yeah, I was a business owner and I had kids, but I didn't really start. Not going to say make money, but I didn't feel like I had a real purpose in life until my first grandson came along, and that's what that the same year as when I wrote my first book. So he's 11 years old now, and now I have 6 grandkids, and
Congratulations.
I just feel like now's the time where now I've been thinking about my legacy. What am I leaving behind? Your dad left you this knowledge that now you're teaching other people. What am I teaching other people? So
Mhm.
my books, my podcasts, videos, to me, that is that's uh, transferring my knowledge to someone else. When people's like, well, Rob, what about social media? I'm like, good Lord, that's giving people ADD. It's all micro content that doesn't mean anything. 2 seconds after someone reads it, they forget it.
Yep.
And I thought social media was going to be that thing that helped. But after being on social media for what, 15 years or so or longer, I just feel that it's causing more harm than good. And I'd rather go back to a world where we're telling real stories and getting people to trust us a different way, a better way, the way that we used to do it.
Well, okay. So my dad, growing up, and this is the way that a lot of people should learn to do it. I'm not. Again, I'm not knocking the people who do it, but you've been to a lot of seminars, right? Where in the
Too
first,
many.
yeah, there's an hour. Everybody's given an hour to speak, and the first 20 minutes is this is who I am and how great I am and why you should listen to me. This is all my successes. This is who I was and stuff like that. My hero journey story. I spent 3 years living in my car or whatever it is. Which of course I don't have. I, I always say I have the most boring, uninspiring marketing origin story. I was born Gary Halbert's kid, right? But anyway, so the first 20 minutes is telling you why you should listen to them, what they have to say. The second 20 minutes is usually spent telling them this is what you should do. The final 20 minutes is telling you here's how to buy and why you should buy instructions from me that'll show you how to do what I just told you to do.
Mm,
And again, I'm saying this, and I'll say I want to repeat it. This is what if you're on the stage, you should be doing. I just don't do it. The reason is I grew up with that, and I grew up with that listening to it so many times. And it depends, And now if somebody paid $100 to get into the room, I'm like, okay, that's fair game. But I would sit there and I'm like, these people paid $4,000 to get into this room, and you're telling them what to do, but not how to do it. I don't get that. So what I do instead was when I take the stage, or if I do a podcast or something, I show people exactly how to do something. But what I do is I just start off. Here's how to do this and why this works, and here's the success of it and everything else. And then at the very end, if the host wants me to pitch, I pitch something else that's related that they will need in addition to that, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I skip over. I'm like, I don't need you to, I mean, I want to make light bulbs go off in their heads. And so my goal as being a Halbert was to make the most experienced marketers in the rooms hands hurt from taking so many notes because they're finally hearing some new stuff that they haven't, and they haven't heard anything new in 20, 30 years. And, so I one time was at a thing and I saw Paris and David Deutsch doing that. And I was like, okay, I did good there because I'm doing this. But I then realized that it'd be better to be more engaging and teach them one thing at a time, the way that my father did. So, my father would give an entire speech explaining something that where you got one big takeaway from it. And so I'm transitioning and trying to do that because I had so many people that would be, I wish I would have started recording this. I've been taking fast and furious notes throughout this whole thing. And I help other people who have copywriting programs despite having my own.
Mm-hmm.
And they will like, man, he's just, can you have him come back on and all these things that he's saying and doing and and again their hands are hurting from taking so many notes and they want to see the replays and the recordings and everything. And it's just that I grew up saying, I want something, this is what I would want. And so this is what I want to see that's different. And so I got super impressed. Like we talked about this earlier, I get super impressed with certain people and because of what their knowledge is really like and what they're saying. And so they are the early adopters and the other tinkerers. And I will follow them religiously and I will pay attention to what they're doing. But we're now going into the third generation of Halbert doing this, which is my son. And he created a group and he realized, and they realized that what we are is Nepo babies, right? And I got to, I mean, I'm not, it's true. I'm a Nepo baby. I have this advantage given to me, but a lot of people don't understand having the last name Halbert gets gets you in the door. Being a Halbert is what gets you invited back, right? Really understanding and knowing your
So
stuff is what.
everybody else has an origin story, and you're a Nepo baby.
Yeah, exactly. And so, but the truth is, after they spend a little time, so what first happened is I remember at first giving interviews with some people on podcasts after my dad had passed, and they say, "You mind if we talk about your dad?" I'm like, "Sure, you can spend the whole time talking about my dad." And then in a little while, they'd realize, "Oh my God," because I would tell a story, and they'd realize I knew so much. They would ask me, "Well, how did that work, or how did you do that?" And then eventually, it became I was the first person to put out a book on editing copy. I
Mm-hmm.
was, I did all these things. So I became an editing guy, I became the subject line guy, I became this, because you get labeled as somebody, this guy, like, you might be the book publishing guy or whatever. And you can change that and relabel it and stuff like that. But what happened was very quickly they realized, oh, he's not just like, it's not like he's Frank Sinatra's kid trying to pretend that he's Frank Sinatra. he he's his own thing and he does his own, he's got his own specialty in it, and he takes all the stuff that my dad had taught me and takes it and does different things with it. And then so what happened is my son wanted me to teach him, and so what I did was a little different. I do all the same things my dad did. I teach him while we're driving, I teach him while we're walking. He records these things, by the way, so it's making boron 2.0.
Mm-hmm.
But what I also did was, so my dad would take me to meetings when he was meeting with other people, and so I'll take my son with when I'm meeting with other marketers. But I will actually select other copywriters and marketers, and I will ask them to give my son a training on the area that I think they are singularly the best at in the world. So I will have, Paris and John teaching him how to write bullets and fascinations. I will have Sam Markowitz teaching him how to, how to develop offers from stuff. I will have Ian Henman come in and talk about how to refresh ads and keep the campaigns going longer, because these people are, this is like they know a lot of stuff, but this is the part that they're like better than everybody else has. So what he's doing is he's got this group where he shares these recordings and trainings, but he's getting from the best of the best their particular interest. And the cool thing about it is his audience gets to look at these people and say, these people charge a lot of money for training, a ton of money for training. But you can figure out, this is the person who resonates with me because I understand what they're saying. I'm walking away with more actionable instructions than this person and that person. So they get a taste of all of these people, and some of these people don't teach or do anything. They're doing. It's not that they don't teach anything. They don't have programs. They're just doing this as a payback to either me or my father, or what the family, the family legacy. So I'm training my son to take over the legacy of what is the Halbert thing. But he's getting my knowledge. He's getting my dad's knowledge. He's getting my knowledge, and he's getting the current best of the best from each individual one. And so he'll ask them all the like 5 or 6 questions, but they are specific. How do you do this? Not how did you get into the game? Don't tell me it's not. None of them are your origin stories. They're all like, how did you get this? How do you do this? How is this successfully run, and stuff like that. And so I got him hooked up with the guy who's either the top 1% of all Facebook advertisers to teach him Facebook ads. And so it's an ongoing thing. And so he's what we're doing is the portions that I'm adding, I want to bundle up together and make Boron 2.0. And then now my dad in the Boron letters, I don't know if you remember this, he said that he hoped that this would be a family tradition where that I would take the knowledge and pass it on to my kids. So I'm hoping my son eventually does that for his kids and creates the Boron 3.0. Now we might have to rename it because, but he might have to, I want that to be an ongoing legacy thing that continues from generation to generation, and each generation builds upon the next. But back to what I was originally saying, you take any Gary Halbert protege, real proteges, not people who hired him to write some ads or do something, but people who lived with him and studied with him and all of this other stuff. You will find that they can walk into any new tech, they can walk into anything, and what they'll do is they'll first go through it, they will pay attention to it, and they will say, this is what's really good, this is what's exciting, this is what's dull, this is what's needed, this is what's missing, this is what other people I would want, so other people would really want it. So this is the kind of offer to make to these people, and this is what market level awareness we should be targeting first. Because like a lot of people make that mistake of trying, this business owners and book authors, they're trying to write a book that covers everything from A to Z. Oh, yeah. And it makes no sense.
Yeah. Because and like you said, focus on one thing. My first book was just about 27 ways of boosting your online reputation through social media. It's called Share, and it was just a simple title. And then the second book I wrote was all about search engine optimization. The third book was, I wanted to go something a little different. So I made it Lessons from the Dojo, and every page was a different lesson. And so there was 101 lessons in there. And the week I was going to launch that book, my wife and I were taking a church trip to Italy. So the whole launch sucked. The book didn't really gain momentum till like 5 years later. But for me, it was.
Well, I'm glad it did eventually.
Well, people will, and then I have this whole Rob versus series of me dealing with scammers and morons. It's just my sarcastic, adventures, and so when they call me on the phone, I just waste their time, and then I write down the conversation, and if it's great, I'll share it out to Facebook. If people get a response, they love it, goes in the next book. And so
it reminds me of one of my dad's favorite books was Ted L. Nancy's Letter from a Nut.
And so every book I do is a little different. The last book I did was called Unscripted, Unfiltered, Unwoo-woo, and Unguru, and I it's just conversations with me and Steve Gamlin, who's been on the eHeroes podcast. At the time, it was 7 times, and I thought after the 7th time, these are great, these are brilliant, they teach lessons. There's an evolution here. I put them together in a book, and people just loved it. So, everything that I got inspired reading your dad's letters, I didn't have to do the same thing over and over and over again. I could do new things. And it was
Yeah.
always and for me, writing a book was always about breaking the rules anyway, because, I always hated in college and high school, I had to write about a certain thing, or there's going back to when we talked about grammar at the very beginning of writing structure. I love one word sentences. I mean,
Yeah.
grammar teachers would their heads would blow off. I mean, they just, Rob, you can't write like that. I can do whatever I want. I got an audience.
Well, when I went to college, I was in for business administration, and I took a class called entrepreneurship. And it was funny because I'm the only kid in college that has more real world experience than every single one of my professors. And nobody's going to know that. They don't know who I am. And this is one of the things that's funny, and I tell this story every once in a while. We were going to get extra credit if we drove out to Palm Springs to meet my professor's hero, and his hero is Joe Cosman. And I was like, I called my dad. I go, you'll never guess who they're sending me to go meet. And he goes, who? I go, Joe Cosman. He goes, oh, you got to tell him I said hello. And I'm like, oh no, because because I'm not telling my professor who I am or anything like this, right? And so at the end of the thing, he's having us all line up and come and thank Joe Cosman for the presentation. And so I purposely got into the very back of the line so that most people would leave the room before I was there. And my professor's standing there right next to him. And I came in and I said, on the very last, and said, hey, I just wanted to say, my father said to say hello. And he goes, oh, who's your father? I said, Gary Halbert. He goes, oh, your dad's Gary Halbert. I love him. And he starts gushing. And my professor's looking at me like, who's this kid? He had no idea that, who I was in this thing. And like, even when, it was just the world of school, college and high school and everything, and what they teach you for writing was just so different from what really worked and stuff. And one of the biggest pieces of proof of that is, look at J.K. Rowling's success, right? I mean, she wrote children books that adults were reading. And who's the most profitable and is writer of all time? Is just for books, not because they didn't turn any of his stuff into movies. Because once something's turned into a movie, it's all things. But the biggest writer of all time for money is,
I have no
do you know
idea.
who it is?
No.
It's Peterson, because he was a direct response copywriter, and
Mm.
he advertised his own books. So what happened is, instead of going to, so you would see these spots on remnant advertising on the television saying, in this book, so and so's, this detective series, blah 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 blah, and people would go in, and this was what they called pull marketing. And so what happened is, people would go into the stores and say, do you have this book? And then the people at the bookstores are like, asking the publishers. And so they'd have to get that book. They'd pull the book into the stores. And then he started working. He does what Dan Kennedy does, which is, Dan Kennedy has like, 20 people working on books that he's, helping guide or do whatever he's doing. But he started off as a direct response copywriter, and he sold more books than both Stephen King and J.K. Rowling.
Wow. Wow.
And it just shows you the power of direct response marketing and what it can do.
Mhm.
And so now he's put out tons of books. I don't know what percentage, and it's like Kennedy. I don't know what percentage his involvement is.
Yeah.
When you see someone else's name on the book, you don't know. Did he just outline it and have it ghostwritten, or did he, write the whole thing? But it was just, when I heard about that, I was very, very impressed by it, because it made such sense. Because I had a friend who had a 4-book deal with Tor
Mm.
Publishing, and and you do see his books on the shelves in bookstores and everything, but his commissions and his royalties from those books, I have one month where I made more than they made through the entire like 2-year run.
Mhm.
You know, and it's just because, you know, the way they're not, the publishers are worried about making their money. So when they put money into advertising, they don't advertise one book, they advertise 20 books on that one page that they buy in the LA Times or whatever it is. And the royalties they get are very, very tiny, you know, versus people who are doing self-publishing. Or there's a company that you can self-publish through, and they do distribution in books, actual bookstores. um,
Um, yeah, I forget. I've been using Amazon for so long, I can't think of the other one. Ingram, I think it's Ingram
I
Sparks,
think
or
it is Ingram. I think it is Ingram. But anyway, the point that I was making is, you know, the it's always a moving target. So right now, a friend of mine was just put out a mystery thriller, a fiction thing. You know, that's very competitive compared to something that, you know, you or I are going to put out. So getting a number one bestseller rank is a little bit more difficult to do. And then you know, and then there's a lot of luck involved, because you want to do is you want to make sure that, um, you know, this guy didn't just put out the Patterson. I'm sorry, I said Peterson. Patterson. His name's James
Patterson.
Patterson.
James Patterson.
I want to clarify that. But anyway, you know, it was like, who else put out something else right at that time, right? Because now, to take that number one spot, are you up against the latest book from Stephen King? You know, in which case you're going to get annihilated, and you don't know when his book is going to drop and stuff like that.
The you know, we could talk about this all day long, and I know we're
Sorry about that.
over our time. One of the books that the series that got me into reading was by Don Pendleton, called the Executioner series. It's called Mac Bolan now,
Oh,
and
Mac Bolan, I read
and
those.
and he Pendleton sold out the rights, I think, after book 38 or 39, and then you know, now they have a whole host of writers writing these Mac Bolan books, and they spun it off four ways to Sunday. There's Able Team, and there's Phoenix Force, and there's this, and there's that, and so they realized that they could make a lot of money with these serial books, and they have a book club. You sign up, and you get these books every month. And you know, I haven't done that for years, but you know, now I'm starting to see them in grocery stores, and they're everywhere. And so, you know, here we go. You had this guy who came up with an idea to write the Executioner series, and you know, I think he's long dead now, but you know, just kind of like you know, the Stan Lee with Marvel. You know,
Yeah.
you never know where your idea is going to go. You know, and
Every,
it could make you a lot of money.
every single marketer I've ever talked to, and I'll ask you the question, the answer is going to probably be the same. Your biggest success, was it a surprise or not?
It
It's
was.
oh,
Yeah.
it's always a shock. That's why, as a marketer, you have to throw stuff against the wall and try things that are off the bat. And think about this. This makes sense. The reason is because you're trying something new,
Mhm.
and new is fresh, refreshing. You know, if I want, you know, look, I read about 10 or 12 Mac Bolan novels,
Mhm.
right? But then they became the same thing, you know. And I
Mhm.
read the Bosch novels too, right? I don't know if you've ever read.
I didn't read the Bosch, but I watched the TV series, and
Okay,
after a
well, the
while,
Bosch
it's the
novel,
same.
the guy lives in Los Angeles, right? And in each novel, he's going underground. He's going into underground tunnels and sewers and all this. And I'm like, this is Los Angeles. I live here. There's not that much underground network here, right? How many times can you do this? But my whole point is, it was refreshing and new when you do the first ones. When you do the 10th one, it's not. So everybody who is clicking and copying everybody else's seven, you know, the 7 things you need to know before writing your next ad,
Mm.
it's not fresh and new anymore. So you have to do one of two things. You have to either borrow a theme or a concept or an idea from a different industry, or you have to go so far back in time and find something that is actually fresh and new again. So
Mhm.
when we used to run, like, so what would happen is, if you ran newspaper campaigns, the campaign had a longevity, right?
Mm.
And then eventually you know, it's no longer profitable to run in the campaigns. But like 5, 10 years later, people forgot about what it was. You had new audiences and you could rerun it. So there was a lady who's clearing out a house of from some people who were passed away, And they were, do you want this? Do you want that? And I'm like, no, I don't want any of that. But then they were throwing away from like, like 1960s New Yorkers, and the best ones, cosmopolitans from like, 70s and the 80s. Pick those up. They're gold. I mean, you look at the direct response advertising that's in there and you can repurpose it and it sounds fresh again.
Yeah. One of the first things that I learned to do, which I don't think anybody does anymore, is when you go through the grocery store, and everybody's now having their shit delivered. But when you go to the grocery store, look at the magazines that are on the racks and look at the headlines.
Yep.
You know, these people that are putting out these magazines are still using these headlines that pull you in because they want you to grab the magazine off the shelf and buy it. You know, and I still practice that. I still go to malls and I watch people. I see what they're doing. I see what they're buying. I see how the conversation that they're having with people. My funnest thing is every year I go to Disney World and I watch people there. And here you got, whether on East Coast or West Coast, you got either the happiest place on earth, the most magical place on earth, but you got people that are miserable because they've expected so much when they get to the park and they've become so overwhelmed they can't have a good time.
Yeah.
You know, had you delivered something to them prior and said, "Look, lower your expectations. This is what you can do. This is how you can make your stay here more enjoyable. These are the steps." People would have actually have a better time.
Well, my kids were lucky because in LA, we're not too far from Anaheim. So we got passes and we took them to Disneyland every other Tuesday because they get out of school early on Tuesdays. They would
Wow.
do their homework either on the porch at Main Street or behind where they park the ship.
Hmm.
And then we would go around and enjoy the park, and then we'd go back to the minivan. They would brush their teeth and get into their pajamas and fall asleep on the way home, and then go to school the next day. And they got to do that for quite a long time. But Disneyland is one of those things where they built. You're right. They build up the expectations. It's a whole bunch of money. It's the airfare. It's the getting the kids excited, and then spending all day standing in line. And now they have a fast pass system, but that's still. It reminds. Do you? I don't know how long you've been going. Do you remember back when it was a ticket book system?
Yeah, that there was a, I've been to Disneyland a couple times, but I normally go to Disney World. They had the tickets,
Yeah.
the printed tickets, printed fast pass though too. Disney World always had uh, as far as I can remember, the little cards that you had. But I know Disneyland had the tickets, the printed ones. They were still using them after, I guess, even after Disney World was, in the 80s and 90s.
Well, I bought my wife one because she likes Disney and everything. So I bought her an actual ticket book, but most of, the kids these days don't know where the term e-ticket ride comes from. They
Yeah.
don't understand that it was the Disneyland ticket books. And the e-ticket was the rare ticket. You only had a couple of them at most in that booklet when you bought it. And those were for the better rides, like,
Mhm.
Matterhorn or whatever it was. But anyway, so I was just curious if you'd remember though, because I remember going, back in the day, and yeah, no, well, it's funny that Dan Kennedy's a really big
Yeah,
Disney
yes.
Disney fan too.
Yeah, Dan is. I've never been there when he was there, but I just I enjoy going there, and people are like, and back in May, I took my kids, my grandkids, we took 15 people to Disney World, and it's like herding cats when you get too many of. But
Yeah.
we had a good time, and it was fun, and it was, yeah, I spent, way too much money, but to me, those are memories. The kids love them, and that's something I want them to remember. That the things that I do, and whether I produce books, whether I do marketing, whatever I do, it's not for my benefit.
Mhm.
The money I make is not for me; it's for them.
Well, the marketing, that's one of the look in marketing. You have to do some stuff so that you're doing it for you, but the ultimate goal in marketing and your success let me say this, your ultimate goal is to make money for you for whatever your purpose is, whether it's your children or for to to, to fund a charity or to whatever it is. But the ultimate success in your marketing will be determined by how much you are doing for the benefit of your buyer.
Mm-hmm.
That's what's going to determine your success. So if that's the whole, remember when I said a little while ago, I said, Halbert protege will come in, they'll say, this is what these people are missing. This is what they wish. This was the frustration. This is all the stuff. I'm going to problem solve this. I'm going to remove this frustration. For example, Disneyland that you mentioned, one of the key ways to make Disneyland more fun is those little, it's like treasure maps and the hidden things like that are in Disneyland that entertain you while you're actually in line.
Mm-hmm.
Like while you're in this line, look, so for example, in Disneyland there's a merry-go-round, and
Mm-hmm.
there's two interesting things about the merry-go-round. One of them is one of the horses is actually a donkey. So can you spot the donkey? That's not a horse. The second one is, which is the one with the gold tooth? Because that was Mrs. Disney's favorite horse,
Mm-hmm.
right? There are all these little things about Disneyland that a lot of people didn't understand or didn't know. Like they have a herd of cats there to chase around mice at night, right?
Mm-hmm.
That mostly hide during the day. But there's all these little secret like things that and pieces of knowledge that you start paying attention to, and it makes the long boring part a little bit more interesting to be a part of because these little secrets of it, and
Mm-hmm.
they can create that. But again, that would be better marketing, because you're now taking the bad part of Disneyland is waiting in really long lines,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so that became, that's a way that you solve that. That's what good marketing is giving your customers a better experience. And the only way you can do that is walk in their shoes and say, this is what I'm doing, this is the way people teach, and this is what's missing. So one of the things that I do is when I teach people headlines or bullets or stories and stuff like that, somebody would teach them, this is the way to think, and this is what your headline should have: curiosity and benefit and stuff like that. I actually teach them. I try and teach them in a way so that they can immediately, when they close the computer, they can sit down and actually just start writing headlines. Not drive around in their car trying to think up of a title, not trying to wait for inspiration to hit while they're in the shower and stuff like that. And it's one of the things that I'm actually going to start saying now, which is, because I had to earn the right to say it. And it does come from my father, but the very best Halbert copywriting course isn't by my dad. It's because I took my dad's lessons and put them into much more step-by-step instructions, avoiding making it look like templated stuff that is going to be new, that's going to be the same thing, that if everybody started doing the same thing that I'm teaching, it's still not going to look like the same thing somebody else wrote.
Mm-hmm.
So it's still not going to be follow the leader, but it's a process that gives you a lot more instruction than say something wow, say something shocking, say something. John Carlton, I love his thing, the incongruent juxtaposition of unrelated things. Right? He tells you that. You figure out what that means, but you're still driving around in your car for a long time trying to figure out, let that float around in your head and looking for something in your research that makes you say that. Right now, John also has really good, systems for teaching stuff as well. I'm definitely not. In fact, his are very good. But the point is, what I'm doing is taking my dad's stuff and putting together the lessons so that when you are doing this, it's like, okay, you're putting in a matrix, and then you're saying, okay, I'm going to fill this part out, this part out, this part out, and then we're going to draw the lines through the exciting points. We're going to stitch them together. Now you got the bullet that's going to be a better bullet. It's all based on Gary Halbert thinking. It's all goes to his credit. But if you follow what my dad, like I told you, what my dad taught was not wordplay. He didn't teach you that ever. He taught, look, these are the top books to read, handwrite ads to know what it's like to mimic a style. And Hunter S. Thompson used to actually type out, I think, The Great Gatsby. He'd type out an entire novel to get the flow of what great writing was like.
Mm-hmm.
But my dad never sat down. He would have people write 100 headlines, but he didn't tell them how to write those 100 headlines. He didn't say, do it this way and do it this way. I actually absorbed all of his work and all of his things, and my editing process came out of patterns I saw. So you mentioned something earlier about liking one word paragraphs,
Mm-hmm.
right? Which I am totally for. My dad's most common one was probably onward, right? He liked, he would say onward, right? And then he'd go into the next thing, which might be somewhat unrelated to the last thing. Well, what I teach in the book about editing sales copy is everybody today is so busy when they know it's a sales pitch, they know it's a landing page, right? What they're doing is they're looking for a place to be sure that when they move on, they're not missing something that's an important part that would be beneficial to their life. Okay. They're looking for the spot to say, oh, I already know this. Oh, that's not for me. Oh, this doesn't apply to me. So when you're editing your copy, you make it to a point where there's no place where they feel comfortable doing that. And so here's the one thing that I will say is an exception. So my dad had 5 rules for editing, which was short paragraphs, short sentences, 5th grade language. Do a that hunt. I'll look for all the times you use the word that, because 90% of the time you've used it when you didn't need to, and remove it and stuff like that. Anyway, what I did was I said, the reason comedy works really well is comedy leaves the punchline, the surprise part at the end of the joke. You can't say it in the middle and then kind of continue. Otherwise, you're a bad comedian. But what I do is I do incomplete sentences with incomplete thoughts. Okay, so it's a mixture of things. It's not like just and but wait, and just there's more. It is like saying, and that's when Rob, revealed the secret to making the book a bestseller.
Mhm.
Okay, I can't stop reading at this point. I got to read the next sentence, so I will go to the next paragraph. So the only time that I won't use like a really short sentence is when that short sentence leaves them a feeling of completeness, and I need another sentence to give them that feeling of incompleteness to need to continue reading more.
Mhm.
And so I will actually take one sentence and chop it off, make it a shorter sentence, and then make the other one into a paragraph. Or I will take the other sentence and move it up to make sure that, that they feel needing more, and that there's something else that, that because the old strategy and this is what I'm showing people how to do, each sentence is designed to get you to read the next sentence.
Mhm.
But at the same time, it's going through the process of AIDA. It's grabbing your attention, it's fueling your interest, it's fueling your desire, or it's compelling you to act. But each sentence is still supposed to do that and continue to do that all the way through the process. Right. And so I would recognize these patterns in things. So some of my dad's best dads, so I'll just give you one real quick trick. If you're there's lots of ways to write a great PS, a postscript. But if you're in a pickle, or you're in a hurry and you just got to write one real quick, what you do is just say remember, comma, restate your main benefit, and then restate your sense of urgency. So you say, remember, in my system, Rob is, or this system, Rob is going to show you how to make a steady living with your books. But there's only room for 100 people, so act now. Now,
Mhm.
here's the reason, and I'll let you go after this because I know we're coming over time. But here's the reason that works. 80% of the power of your ad, and I think it was Sugarman that also said this too, is your headline, your bullets, and your PS.
Mhm.
Because you have 4 different kinds of readers. You have the OCD reader who starts reading at the top and continues until he or she says, this is not important in my life and I can move on and I don't have to read it anymore. And I'm going to stop. Then you have the person who comes in and what they say is, I'm going to scan this and see if it's something I want that is, I'm going to scan it. I'm just going to read the headline, the bullets, the PS, and the offer. Oh, that's for me, and I'm going to buy. A lot of people just do that. Other people will go in and they'll scan it and they'll see a subhead, and the subhead will say how you should title your books, right? And then it'll say, and if you title your book correctly, it's like its own mini advertisement, and they go in from there and they start reading on from that point down, right? And then they decide to buy based on the offer.
Mhm.
The last one is the people who are skimming the headline, the bullets, and the PS, and then going back to start reading at the top because they're like, this should be interesting to me. So that PS trick says, oh, this is the benefit this guy is offering, which is the benefit I want. And there's a sense of urgency. So if I don't read this now, I might not be one of the first 100 people that can get into his program. So what I'm going to do is go back and read this. But it also works with all of those other readers. It kicks them off the fence if they came in at the middle, if they started at the top and got there at the bottom, or kicks them off the fence into reading your copy if they're scanned at first to decide whether or not to read it.
Hmm.
And so what I'm trying to do now is take my dad's, this is stuff that I recognized in good ads and patterns and stuff like that, that my dad wrote and other legends wrote, and things that have worked for me that I've written and stuff like that. So that and then that puts in a thing. So like the way that I just explained that to you, you'll never have to worry about writing a PS ever again. You just say, remember, state your main benefit that they want, restate your sense of urgency, and you got your PS. And it works for all those 4 readers.
So where do people go? Where do they find you?
Okay, so bondhalbert.com, they can find me there. And I think if you want to follow and check out, what my son's doing is kind of experimental. You can check out his website, which is Nepo Baby Marketing. But what's great about that, by the way, he's turning that on the head. He's saying it's not fair to be a Nepo baby. So he's sharing all these lessons for $5 a month. And it's a great little thing. But go to bondhalbert.com, and that's where you can learn about me and what I do and stuff like that. And then of course there's the GaryHalbertLetter.com. And and it's I mean, and I'm pretty prolifically around the place. So you can Google my name, you go to podcasts and put in my name and stuff like that. But bondhalbert.com should do it.
I just typed in nepobabymarketing.com, and the headline is Gary Halbert's grandson sells never before seen videos from unbeatable experts of 2024. So
Yep.
he's already sowing the knowledge of others.
Oh yeah, no, he well, I said, the great thing is what you're getting is an advantage other people don't have. And and the thing, it's great teaching him, because I'm like, well, you got to explain it in terms that, like, look, you're charging less than a cup of Starbucks coffee per month.
Hmm.
And this is, and his biggest problem is people believing and understanding that what he's giving is actually that good,
Hmm.
you know. So don't be surprised if I send you an email asking you to come out and give him a micro training.
So this was great, and I want everybody to go visit bondhalbert.com and make sure you buy the Boron Letters. Yeah, it's a great book, and you'll get the deeper understanding of Gary, and also of Bond. And we'll see you guys on the next episode. Adios.
Thank you very much.